Now that we have talked about what increases and decreases in supply look like, the shifting of supply curves up and down on the graph, we can talk about what are those factors that shift the supply curve around. Now, your textbook refers to these as supply shifters, but in general, economists refer to them as determinants of supply, and so that's the term I'm going to use in this lecture. We've got 6 determinants of supply to discuss, similar to the 6 determinants of demand that we talked about earlier. And the first determinant of supply is very similar to the first determinant of demand. Remember, with demand, it was population. So as more consumers enter a market, demand increases. And if consumers exit a market, then demand is going to decrease. The same logic applies on the supply side. The number of producers, the more sellers there are in a market, the greater supply is. And the fewer sellers there are in a market, the fewer producers, the lower supply is going to be. So entry by firms into the market will increase supply. Exit out of the market by firms will decrease the supply. Second, we've got the state of technology. And this is just simply a way of saying that as technology improves for producing some product, producers are able to make more of it for the same cost, or perhaps even at a lower cost. So you can imagine like farming, right? As you move from using just wooden hand tools to horse-pulled plows to tractors to today's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and combines and the like. It becomes possible to produce more and more of a product, more wheat, more corn, more grain at a lower price per unit. Okay, an example of this is from the 1975 Radio Shack catalog. You can see on the screen there what they're referred to as their best and most powerful state-of-the-art stereo. So this is 1975. That's 45 years ago. And as you can imagine, the quality of this stereo, despite the fact that it had the attractive wood paneling on the outside, the quality of the stereo is not as good as the quality of the stereos that we have today. And back then, you could purchase that stereo for the low price of $399.95. Now, earlier this week, I looked up, Radio Shack doesn't really exist anymore, so you can't find stereos on a website for them. But I just Googled, right, stereo systems, and this was one of the many that came up. Everything about that second stereo system in terms of the quality of the sound and the control that you have over that sound and the endurance, how long it's going to last, it's all better in the second stereo than it is in the first stereo. But today you can get this newer, more improved stereo for a price of $159.99. So the price has fallen by more than 50% from 1975 to 2020 because the technology for producing stereos has improved so drastically. We are much better at making them today than we were 45 years ago. And by the way, when I say that the price has fallen by more than 50%, that's not accounting for inflation. Those $399.95 were worth more 45 years ago than they are today. So you can take a guess at what the price in 2020 dollars would be if it's $399.95 in 1975 dollars. I'll let you. I know the answer, but I'm not going to give it away in the video. You can leave a comment in this video if you think you know what it is. But before leaving the comment, do not look the answer up. Okay, try to make it an honest effort. All right, next up we have the prices of inputs. Now, an input for some good, some item, it's one of the components that's necessary to produce that item. So things like the labor that are involved, or the price of the raw materials, or the rent that you have to pay for the factory that you're working in, or whatever. Okay, if the price of an input increases, now it becomes more costly to produce every unit of a product. Okay, and that means that supply is going to decrease because you have let let me put it this way. If it used to cost you $2 to produce a unit, the lowest price you would be willing to accept for that unit would be those $2. But if the price of one of the inputs goes up so that now it costs you, I don't know, $3, well, now you're not going to be willing to sell for those $2 anymore. You would now require a price of $3 before you're willing to produce that unit. So you're going to have a decrease in the supply curve, right? The supply will shift up and to the left. On the other hand, if the price of your inputs decreases, well, then it becomes cheaper to produce every unit, and so sellers will be more willing to sell units at any given price than they were before. So a decrease in the price of an input is going to increase the supply of the product. Next, we have taxes and subsidies. And taxes and subsidies is really, you can think of it as a special version of the prices of inputs. It's just that in this case, you can think of the tax or the subsidy as a government-imposed input price. So suppose that we have a product where the cost structure looks like the following. The first unit that you produce costs you $2. Second unit that you produce costs $2.50. The third unit costs $3, and so on. And let's just assume that that relationship holds across the entire supply curve, that every unit costs 50 cents more than the unit before to produce it. Okay, now suppose that the government imposes a tax, a per unit tax on this market. Maybe what we're selling here is like boxes of cigarettes, and they now say there's going to be a $2 per pack tax imposed on cigarettes. All right, well, that first box of cigarettes that cost you $2 to produce, now if you sell it, the government is going to charge you $2 in taxes. So what cost you $2 to produce is now really costing you $4 to produce once that $2 tax is implemented. So now the lowest price you would accept to produce that first unit is going to be $4, $2 more than it used to be, or $2 more than the original cost of production. The second unit costs you $2.50 to produce, but when you add in that $2 tax, the lowest price that you would be willing to sell for would now be $4.50. And the third unit costs you $3 to produce, but once you include the $2 tax, you wouldn't be willing to sell it for less than $5, and so on. So as you can see, when you add in that tax, that's going to shift the supply curve up by an amount equal to the tax. You get a vertical shift in the supply curve. What if the government didn't tax your good? What if instead they subsidized your good? So they told you, this has never happened as far as I know, but they told you, okay, you're selling boxes of cigarettes? We're going to pay you, the company, $2 for every pack of cigarettes that you sell to consumers. Well, that first pack of cigarettes that you sold cost you $2, that you produced cost you $2 to make it. But since you know that the government's going to pay you $2 in order to sell it, you should be willing to, if you had to, give it away for free to a consumer. Now, of course, you'd want to sell it for more than that, but the lowest price you would be willing to accept would be a price of $0, because you know you can get the cost made up to you by the government. The second unit costs you $2.50 to produce, but since you know the government's going to pay you $2 for selling that pack, you should be willing to sell it for any price above above 50 cents. And the third unit costs you $3 to produce, but the government's going to make up $2 of that cost through the subsidy, so the lowest price you should be willing to accept would be $1 per unit. And if you follow that logic all the way along the supply curve, what you can see is that you get a downward shift, an increase in the supply curve, and that vertical shift is exactly equal to the amount of the subsidy per unit, per pack in this case. So taxes, those will tend to decrease supply. They'll shift the supply up, and subsidies will increase supply. They will shift the supply curve down. Next up, we have expectations of future prices. Now, remember when we were talking about demand, I said that consumers always have an eye towards buying a product as cheaply as they can. Well, Sellers always have an eye towards selling a product for as much as they can. They want the opposite. They always want to sell when the price is high. They'd rather sell when the price is high than when the price is low. All right? Well, what does that mean? That means that if sellers expect the price of a good to fall in the future, they're going to be willing to sell more of it today at today's current prices. Okay, so if you were holding on to gold, for example, and you were maybe you have, I don't know, let's say you have 100 ounces of gold, and you were told that 2 months from now the federal government was going to open Fort Knox and sell off all of its gold, its hoard of gold, and that's going to push the price of gold down. Well, if you knew that was the case, and maybe today you had only been planning on selling 10 of your 100 ounces of gold, now that you know that the price is going to go down by so much in the near future, you might be willing to sell 50 ounces of gold or all of your gold to get the cash now while the gold is still valuable. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that if sellers expect future prices to fall, they're going to supply more today. Supply will increase if future prices are expected to fall. What if future prices are expected to increase? Well, you're going to have the opposite. If you had your 100 ounces of gold and you were thinking about selling 10 ounces today, but you found out that the federal government was going to go on a big gold buying spree 2 months from now, and that was going to push the price up by, let's say, 20% or 30%, now you would be more reluctant to sell any of your gold because you know if you wait just 2 months, you can sell it for a better price. And so maybe if you had been planning to sell 10 of your ounces of gold, maybe you're going to cut that back to 5 ounces of gold or 7 ounces of gold. Or if you don't need the money right now, you might not sell any of your gold. You might wait those 2 months to sell them when the price gets so much higher. So if the price is expected to go up in the future, then sellers will decrease their supply today. Supply will fall in the present. Okay? And then finally, that brings us to the final determinant of supply, which is changes in opportunity costs. The basic idea here is whenever a seller is selling one thing, they're making profit in one market or selling one product, there are profits that they could have been making if they were selling something else, if they were running a different business. Okay? That is their opportunity cost. Well, if the value of their next best alternative increases, you're going to have to pay them more to keep doing the thing that they're doing now instead of shifting into whatever that opportunity cost is. So simple example, imagine that you are a farmer and you could either be raising wheat or corn. Okay? And right now you are raising wheat. Well, suppose that the price that you could sell corn at goes up by 10% or 20%. Now it's going to become, even though nothing's happened to your cost structure of producing wheat, your opportunity cost has gone up because now if you were raising corn, you could sell it at a more profitable price than you could have in the future. So you're going to start supplying less wheat and start shifting your production over to corn, right? Or at least you're going to be tempted to do that. The only way that you would want to keep producing the exact same amount of wheat would be if the price of wheat is also going up, which is another way of saying wheat is becoming more scarce if the price is going up. So opportunity costs in some other sector can affect supply in a different sector. All right, that is the final determinant of supply, and so that brings us to the conclusion of our lectures on supply and demand. Next week we'll be talking about chapter 4 in your textbook, which is on elasticity of supply and elasticity of demand.